It is a Friday emergency pod. Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Parrino. This is Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. And the news broke a little over an hour ago that the Arizona Cardinals have released DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver, which is going to make a lot of fan bases quite frantic. And obviously, the Bills Mafia have been following this storyline for months since it was reported that DeAndre Hopkins could be had in a trade. He now hits the free agent market, and there's so much stuff to get into. Before we do that, though, Ryan, how are you? And we got a date. Let everybody know about it.
Yeah, next show at Wingnuts, Friday, June 23rd, Bills Mafia. Make sure you join us down at Military Road, 700 Military Road, for Buffalo's best wings, best beers, and best time at the Shout Buffalo Football Podcast.
The best news is you don't have to go very far to get the details in the description on YouTube, into the description on all of the audio platforms. There's a link to the event page over on Facebook. RSVP there. Just say that you're interested. You don't even have to commit, right? We could just go on a couple dates. It doesn't have to be so serious. What it'll do is it'll give you a little ping as we get closer to the date and just remind you that the event is coming up. If you want to come out and hang with us on Friday night, June 23rd at Wingnuts, 700 Military Road inside Froth Brewing Company. All right, DeAndre Hopkins hits the free agent market. And Ryan, the Arizona Cardinals just said, screw it. Like, let's just move on. We're not going to be good this year. The offense is probably going to be anemic without a reliable quarterback to start the year. Kyler Murray still rehabbing from his injury from a year ago. And, they made this move. They didn't even put a post June 1st designation on it. They're going to eat the $22 million in dead cap. Opens up, I think, $8 million this year, potentially, I think 20-ish million next year, whatever the numbers were. That's not really what Bills fans care about. The Bills fans care about how does Brandon Beane go about procuring the services of DeAndre Hopkins. I feel like this is going to be a complicated pursuit. Von Miller is on social media as expected, starting the recruiting train. Deion Dawkins, Shaq Lawson, who played with DeAndre Hopkins at Clemson, has joined the fray. What do you feel like is the path to the Bills securing a deal for Hopkins? Because I think this is a bit complicated.
It is a bit complicated, but first and foremost, there are still some contracts that they could restructure that they haven't done yet. And I know Brandon Beane has gone on the record saying there were still a few moves up their sleeve that they could always pull off, but you don't want to always restructure everyone because then it makes life more difficult on a year-by-year basis. But Deion Dawkins' deal, someone that is already recruiting DeAndre Hopkins on social media, that's a contract that you could restructure, someone that you feel confident is going to play out the duration of that deal, so you'll be okay with that. That's step one. Step two is, I would think you would probably want to make it a multi-year deal, and I know he's older, but by doing that, you can kind of tinker with the cap hits for how much you're looking to pay him in 2023, 2024. You get the gist of that there. So those are the first two things that I would be looking at. Now, Hopkins, who knows? Maybe he's sitting there saying, I want at least Odell Beckham Jr. type money, and
Sure.
I only want a 1-year deal. It could be like that. We don't know. That's the stuff that goes on behind closed doors. How many times have we heard players say, I want to go somewhere, win a championship, and then they go and they sign to the highest dollar amount? It happens all the time in the NFL. I remember when the Bills were in on that J.J. Watt pursuit, and he landed in Arizona, and money ultimately played the biggest role. So this happens all the time. Hopkins could prove that, winning a ring is important to him. He could prove that all that stuff that he said and not said. I know he did that one podcast with Bryant McFadden where all he did was reactions and he smiled about the Bills and things like that. But he can show that, hey, Josh Allen's the quarterback I want to play with. He said that recently on the I Am Athlete podcast, calling him a new age Andrew Luck. He obviously has a good friend in Von Miller and a former teammate here in Shaq Lawson. So there's a lot to like here if you're Hopkins, if you're really serious about going after a Super Bowl this year. But it could come down to being the highest bidder as well. And there's a lot of teams that would love to add a Hopkins as, quote unquote, that missing piece.
So free agent reporter extraordinaire, formerly of NFL.com, Mike Giardi, had a report close or shortly after the Arizona Cardinals released the news. And he said that Buffalo's had interest. The Patriots have had interest. Best he said he can tell is that no one believes he is what he once was. And that will be part of the challenge in acquiring the player. A couple of teams Giardi says that he spoke with before the draft believe that money will be the driver in this more so than chasing a ring. And this is a really important point to dive into, because even with everything that you laid out there, moving some money around, the Bills would have to do that, I think, to come to a deal anyway. I mean, they're really up against it. The Puna Ford deal, I mean, there is not a lot of cap space. I don't know the official number, but it's definitely less than probably $7 million. I think at this point they'd have to do some work. I think Spotrac has it at like almost 2 million right now, but I don't know if that's how accurate that is or where things are at. The thing for me with the pursuit is like, okay, how much do you have to commit to Hopkins past this season, right? Like if this is going to be something that hinders your cap in 2025 with the unknown of how this even all fits together, like that's a piece of this too, Ryan. Like when there's a player that the caliber of Hopkins, you almost like get him under contract and figure out the rest later, right? Like there's a talent level here that you'd be adding in. A lot of the advanced metrics, I saw Aaron Schatz from Football Outsiders put out a tweet after the news saying that he did some type of DVOA deep dive. And I think it was about yards or wins. I'll have to look up the exact tweet. Wins per route and how you add to your team's win percentage based on your ability as a receiver, as a route runner, or winning on your routes, whatever it was. He was number 2 last season, Hopkins, to only Tyreek Hill. So there's obviously still some stuff left in the tank. I just wonder if you're the Bills, how much do you have to believe in the fit to go out and perhaps alter your plans over the next couple of seasons cap-wise?
You have to believe in the fit. You have to kind of go against what Brandon Beane has said as well about, I don't want to go all in. I believe that we can contend for the next few years. And a DeAndre Hopkins signing would essentially be going all in for this year or however many years they signed him for. And, there's pros and cons to that. Like you said, you don't want to mess with your cap hits for the next 3-4 years when you know how important it is with Josh Allen, with some of these guys that you have only under contract for another year or two that you want to re-sign. But the counterpoint to that is, hey, we have Stephon Diggs right now, and he's 30, and he's at that age too where you worry about when that dip's going to come. But right now, as of last year, certain teams could take him out of the game plan. The way that they played him, the way that they covered him, the Bills just didn't have that viable number 2 option. Now, Gabe Davis was dealing with an ankle injury. I know they went out, they addressed it a little bit by adding Dalton Kincaid this year. But if you add DeAndre Hopkins, even an older DeAndre Hopkins in that second stage of his career, teams aren't going to be able to play Stephon Diggs the way they did last year. And if they did, then Hopkins is going to be running open a lot. And if they tried to play Hopkins like that, Diggs is going to be open a lot. So, both guys would probably have to kind of come to a realization that, okay, our final stat lines may not look like what we want at the end of the year. But if the ultimate goal is winning a Super Bowl, which in my mind, for both of those players, it would be, they would be able to come to that common ground. There's going to be games where you eat, there's going to be games where I eat, and both guys are going to have really productive seasons.
I think they can get really creative with usage as well, and maybe take a little bit. Like, listen, Diggs and Hopkins aren't like spring chickens. I mean, maybe like keeping them healthy long term is the play. I like a lot of what you just said there. I want to move to the money part of it. A lot of people are asking, like, could you get one person asked over here, Alex Barber, could you get him on a 1-year, $14 million deal? If I'm DeAndre Hopkins, I don't know if I'm really game for a 1-year deal at this point. If there is going to be drop off, I'd probably want to secure some type of extra, like in that JJ Watt range, where it's like a 2 or 3 year deal. You get a little bit of comfort with the deal, a little bit of wiggle room. So Mike Giannetti from Spotrac put out a comp at age 30. Julio Jones got a 5-year, $87 million contract with the Falcons. That included $64 million guaranteed. Now, obviously, DeAndre Hopkins a year older than Jones was at that time, but I think Hopkins is coming off of a similar amount of production last season. That if you take that deal that Julio Jones got when he signed it a few years ago and kind of push it forward a little bit, that would be put Hopkins in line for about $20 million per year. Now, that's a lot of money, right? For a 31-year-old wide receiver. I don't know if that necessarily ends up being what he comes in at. Greg Allman from Fox, he covers the NFL for them. He said the Cardinals couldn't find any takers with 2 years and $38 million left on his deal, so might not really reach that high. And I think probably that sweet spot, Ryan, is that $10 to $13 million range, I think. But I think you're gonna have to figure out a way to do a multi-year deal.
Yeah, multi-year deal makes the most sense for the player, for the team, for both parties. A lot of the stuff that you said makes perfect sense for the Bills, makes a lot of sense for Hopkins at that age where you want that financial security. I think that the trade market just never panned out for Hopkins. Like you said, there's a lot of reasons. One, Arizona didn't want to eat any of the contract, and that's what teams are looking for. But now that they are releasing him, it's a completely different ballgame. And Buffalo, who, Brandon Beane has said, I don't want to give up high draft capital and things like that for a short-term solution. Well, now you don't have to give up the draft capital, and you just have to figure out the financials. And if there's one thing that Beane's been really good about in his tenure as Bills GM, it's working out those contracts where maybe sometimes you first see the numbers and there's a little bit of sticker shock. But then when there's the full breakdown, the cap hits are never as high as you anticipate. There's always those outs in the deal. So again, it comes down to, is Hopkins serious about winning? And the Bills aren't going to be the only winning team pursuing him. I would bet money that the Chiefs are going to be in on him, and that'll be a very, intriguing offer if you're Hopkins. And he mentioned Lamar Jackson as a quarterback he would like to play with. And there was that whole time where there's a report that Lamar Jackson pretty much said, I want Odell Beckham Jr. and Hopkins in Baltimore. And, they worked out one deal. Maybe they could work out both now. So there's going to be a lot of contenders in on him. But everything that I've heard so far, Matt, from Hopkins about Josh Allen being his favorite quarterback, and Von Miller months ago saying, DeAndre Hopkins said he wants to be a Buffalo Bill. There's a lot of reasons to believe that if the Bills can just reach a middle ground with him, that this could be his next team here in 2023.
Yeah, and I think what probably ends up happening, depending on what the appetite is out there for his services, I think like a 1-year deal, the more I sit here and think about it, like there's potential there. Like if he wants to kind of link on somewhere, have a really good season with a really good offense, he's obviously maintained that that's kind of his priority, is to link up somewhere that has a good quarterback that, he can come in and compete. I don't think he's at the stage of his career that he wants to go anywhere for big money and then just be in the same situation he was in Arizona. So I think that would push the everything forward a little bit. And then, sorry, I got a text message off to the side. I tell my wife all the time, I'm like, you don't text me during my shows because I get the pop-ups on the side here. And then I'm like, if I'm talking like that, I'm in the middle of a point, or if I'm saying something, I completely lose my train of thought. The Beckham Jr. contract, though, is something to think about. Everybody freaked out when it was 18 million and like, how did he get that money? And that's crazy. But correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, the Ravens aren't on the hook for all of that this year. They structured it in a way to kind of push that out over, I think it's 2 years. I don't have the exact details in front of me. As a matter of fact, I'm going to look up the contract over on our good buddy Spot Track, Mike Ginetti's website. So he signed a 1-year, $18 million deal that came with a base of $15 million salary. The cap hit for this season is $3.93 million. Okay, so that's doable. The Bills that would only take one restructure. I don't know if you want to get in the game of restructuring both Deion Dawkins and Trey White, depending on what you think the long-term prospects are there. But next year, $11 million cap hit they'll eat next year, when Beckham Jr. is not even on the roster. 2 million, 2.7 million, 2.7 million, and 2.7 million in the 3 years. So they're gonna have dead cap hits for the next couple of years.
Yeah, and that's a dangerous game to play. And I think a lot of it when it came to Baltimore was, if we sign him, it's going to appease Lamar Jackson, get him under contract long term, and it worked out for them. I'm not sure if that's a route that Brandon Beane's going to go, but I just keep going back to what the player Hopkins said it in this I Am Athlete podcast. There's a lot more than just Josh Allen is my favorite quarterback. He talked about what he was looking for, and I'll read the quote. "What I want is stable management upstairs," Hopkins said. "I think that's something I haven't really had the past couple of years of my career coming from Houston and then to Arizona. I've been through 3 or 4 GMs in my career, so a stable management. A QB who loves the game, a QB who brings everybody on board with him and pushes not just himself, but everybody around him, and a great defense. Great defense wins championships." The Bills' defense is ranked statistically high every year under Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott. Beane's been here since May of 2017, and obviously Josh Allen is that franchise QB. So they check all the boxes, and it just makes a lot of sense. If the money works out for both parties, if you restructure Deion Dawkins and you can get him at that $10-12 million maybe, then I don't want to say I would expect it because the NFL is funny and another team could come in that we're not expecting. But I just think it makes so much sense for both sides, both parties, in a big year for the Bills where a lot of national media members, a lot of websites are almost kind of writing them off at this point and talking about maybe that window's closed for them. You get Hopkins, well, that window opens up a little bit more. I know he's an older player, but all of a sudden you have an elite 1-2 punch despite their ages.
The two teams that a lot of people I think immediately go to nationally and across the NFL, different fan bases, the Bills and the Chiefs, right? Like those are the teams that you think could use a DeAndre Hopkins to kind of get things going in their offense. I don't think that the Eagles could quite fit it in. Even from a mouths to feed perspective, they got a lot of players over there. Odds from Bet Online are out, courtesy of our good buddy Nick Veronica tweeted this out. The Dallas Cowboys have the best odds to land Hopkins at 2-1, Kansas City Chiefs at 4-1, the Patriots at 5-1, and the Bills at 6-1. The Eagles come in at 7-1, and the Ravens come in at 8-1, which I thought was interesting because I got an email from bookies.com odds maker back on April 27th. And then the Baltimore Ravens had the best odds at plus 120 to be the next team for DeAndre Hopkins, which, things change pretty quickly. They're different websites, but I thought that was interesting. And those are kind of the teams that are in the mix. For me, I don't know if Hopkins makes a ton of sense for what the Chiefs want to be at this point. They have their, alpha in Travis Kelce, and they've built all these little pieces around him. And the one thing that Tyreek Hill that I thought was such a nice compliment to Kelce is that he brought that insane speed element that I don't think Hopkins brings even in his prime, like that explosive 4.3, 4.2 speed. You're not getting that with that player. So, and I also maintain, and we talked about this on recent episodes, that Hopkins in some ways is a bit of a duplicate of Diggs. Now, that's not necessarily a problem because, Diggs is 30 years old and he's been very healthy the last couple of years, but you never know what's going to happen in the future. I think insulating yourself a little bit, safeguarding against injury is part of the reason you go out and get a DeAndre Hopkins, but also when they're all on the field together. Like, could you imagine a 5 wide receiver front of Gabe Davis, Diggs, Hopkins, and then Kincaid and Knox? Put them all out in the formation, get crazy with it. I mean, if Ken Dorsey can get creative, I think you could do a lot of things with DeAndre Hopkins if you're able to get him.
And the one thing I'll say too about, if you still have questions about this Bills offense and in Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator, if you bring in DeAndre Hopkins and he can't make that work, well then, maybe then you can realize we need to bring in a proven play caller, someone with a little bit more experience in 2024, 2025. And beyond. This is kind of like hey, we like what you did statistically in a lot of areas last year. We're giving you another weapon now. Make it work. Go out there, improve upon, some areas that you kind of struggled with last year, but it would help with the red zone offense. It would help when the teams are trying to stop Stephon Diggs. It gives them all those weapons that you just mentioned. And then there's still guys like Deontay Hardy, who they brought in on a deal that was maybe a little higher than some people thought when it was first reported, but they like him. They like that speed, the yards after catch. Trent Sherfield, the guy that we talked about recently too. And they have a lot of other guys at receiver that you can bring in. You can do 4 receiver, 5 receiver sets. You can go with those tight ends. It just gives them so many options and so many potential headaches for opposing defensive coordinators that's another reason I like it. It just kind of tells Ken Dorsey, hey, here you go. Take this, run with it, make it work. But we have high expectations if we were able to bring you Hopkins and add it to what we already have.
On June 23rd, it is a Friday night. We are back live at Wingnuts. Come out, eat wings, drink beers, talk Bills with Ryan and myself. We got a special guest coming out. Our first guest. I'm gonna try to line up multiple guests for this show. I'm gonna try to blow it out. We got Nate Geary from WGR 550. He's been meaning to get out to Wingnuts, and so he sent me a DM the other day. He will be out. We're excited to have him there, and stay tuned for some more announcements as we move up to that date. Hit that like button, subscribe as well. We're gonna go a few more minutes, Ryan, because I wanted to talk a little bit about Stefon Diggs, and you've seen some of the commentary nationally, especially over the last couple of days. I think it was Mike Florio, who everybody thought was the Mike Florio we were going to have on the show last week, but we had the GOAT Mike F. Florio on the show. And then I think it was Chris Sims. They were doing a bit of a podcast talking about what it means for Stefon Diggs to be at OTAs. And I thought it was just kind of comical personally to see Mike Florio going on and on about the importance of OTAs and how you have to be there and there's a lot going on, and he thinks that they should make them mandatory and this and that. It's like, dude, it reminded me of that old man on the porch gif, right? Like screaming at the kids to get off of his lawn. I don't know. Like, I'm not going to bang too hard on Florio. We've done that plenty of times over the course of our show. I don't know. I don't have a huge issue with it. I think if my issue with everything, right? And I get Diggs being Diggs. It makes total sense. Like, he's very just in the moment. He's emotional. He's competitive. All the things that his teammates and coaches love about him. There's, some probably frustrating elements to that. He's let a lot of this simmer over the course of the last 3 months because he hasn't really directly answered it. He's had multiple opportunities in interviews. Like, I go back to Super Bowl week where he was directly asked by, I believe, Dan Patrick, Rich Eisen, about that exchange between him and Josh Allen. And he didn't really talk about Josh at all. He just kind of listen, I'm never going to complain for being not okay with losing. And I get that. Everybody gets that about you. It's almost at this point, you don't even have to say that anymore. I think the question is, do you have a problem with Josh Allen? And his unwillingness to maybe talk about that has allowed people to really start to run with the idea that maybe he does have a problem with it. I thought Von Miller's comments earlier this week were well said, and I agree with them. There's no problem there. He's going to show up, mandatory minicamp, training camp. They're going to hit the ground. They're going to roll the ball out, and it's going to be all systems go like it always is. But I definitely don't think that's my biggest takeaway from all this is that Diggs hasn't done his part to maybe quell any of this. But at the same time, is that really his responsibility? I guess it depends on how you look at the whole thing.
No, it's probably not his responsibility. He hasn't quelled it, though, like you mentioned. There probably won't be another Sports Illustrated for Kids episode with Allen giving Diggs a piggyback ride. But I still think that they're going to come together and have a very productive season. I know early on, yes, everything that they would share, retweet one another, they would, and you're not seeing that as much. That's not that big of a deal. Stefon Diggs is his own person. Josh Allen hasn't been on social media as much this past offseason. I think, like Von Miller said, once the ball gets rolling, once the games matter, once things matter, it'll be fine. It'll be great. The offense will be great with that connection. They've always had that chemistry. As for the OTA talk, it's ridiculous from Florio. Stefon Diggs was here for, I think it was week 2 last year, or one of the weeks, or week 1, and he missed the next two weeks after that, or whatever the case may be. OTAs aren't that important for these veteran players. And, I go back to the first year that the Bills traded for Stefon Diggs. That was the COVID year, Matt. And if there was ever a year where there were players that weren't getting together, weren't practicing with one another, traveling to different places, having these OTAs, It was that year. And what did Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs do that season? They had immediate chemistry, immediate connection. He comes in, 127 catches, over 1,500 yards that season. He's been nothing but exceptional in his 3 years here in Buffalo. That chemistry is not going to change no matter what's gone on there. And you know that, and you just know that. And in terms of the OTAs, this is a great opportunity for the Trent Sherfields and the Deontay Hardys and the Dalton Kincaids and the guys that haven't had those live reps with Allen yet, or as many. It's going to help them in terms of accelerating that chemistry. It's going to help a guy like Khalil Shakir in year 2, who, Josh Allen has had a lot of praise for. And I think it's going to help a lot of those guys where Diggs doesn't need that. He doesn't need those reps with Allen. You know that they're going to be A-okay when the games matter.
You're going to be A-okay if you join us on June 23rd out at Wingnuts inside Froth Brewing Company, 700 Military Road. Do not miss it. We can't wait to bring you the live edition. Spend some time. We were there last time. I think we closed down the place. Our good friend of the show, Scott Moranto, tries to get out to a bunch of them. He was out. We had some drinks. We shared some conversation. It was great. We met all these different Bills fans that came out. So please, if you can, it's summertime. Get it locked into your calendar. We want to blow this next live event out. We want to have a bunch of people. It's going to be a fun time, right?
Kick off the summer right with the Shout Podcast, June 23rd, Friday night, Wingnuts, 700 Military Road.
He's Ryan. I am Matt. That is your emergency pod, DeAndre Hopkins edition. We will keep you. We'll keep on this over the weekend, see how things develop, and we'll be back on Tuesday for our next OTAs observation shows. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend. Get outside. Enjoy.